7% after its third quarter earnings missed expectations. The shortfall was largely due to a $619 million settlement of a multi-year tax dispute with Brazilian authorities. But beyond that, it was a solid quarter. Revenue rose 17% year over year to $11.5 billion, which was in line with expectations. It was also a record quarter for ad sales. The streamer is on pace to more than double its ad sales revenue this year. And these earnings follow a very big day for streaming media at large. As I just mentioned, Warner Brothers Discovery stock popped more than 9% after the company signaled it was open to a sale, and CNBC reported that Netflix could be a potential buyer. Plus, HBO rolled out another round of price hikes on both its ad-free and its ad-supported tiers. So, here to help us break down all of this, we are speaking with Jason Bazinet, Managing Director of Media and Entertainment Research at Citigroup. Jason, good to have you on the program once again.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So we want to start with your initial reactions to Netflix earnings. What were your main takeaways here?
I think we got it maybe half right, I would say, going into this. We expected the company to miss results primarily on currency. Not that the US dollar isn't weak year over year, but since they gave the 3Q guidance, the dollar has strengthened. And we got that part right. The part that we missed and didn't anticipate was this one-time charge that they took down in Brazil, which hit them by about $600 million. And that's really a dispute they've had down in Brazil going back to 2022. They took that $600 million hit, sort of recognizing all of those cumulative expenses in this quarter. And that caused them to miss operating income, which is one of the street's primary metrics. So that's why the stock is down primarily after hours.
Yeah, down quite significantly, down 7%, which seems a little surprising, at least to me, if this is sort of a one-off tax settlement. Were you surprised at all by the extent to which the stock fell?
Well, it is one-off, but I would say that, remember, there's so many of these platform funds that are very fast money, right? And the soft expectation on the street was that they would not miss the quarter and that they would raise their full year guidance. So if that was your narrative sort of going into this quarter, and this one-time event means they don't really raise the full year guide, you sort of didn't get it right.
Beyond that, pretty solid quarter, revenue up 17%. Record quarter for ad sales. Any takeaways on the business itself, especially maybe the ad business, which I know they've been investing more into?
Yeah, I mean, the ads business is interesting in that it gets a lot of attention because it's one of the main inflection points, meaning something that's different for Netflix now than it was in years past. But in the absolute sort of quantum of dollars, it's actually pretty small. We think it, last year probably did $1 billion. They said they're on track to have it more than double this year, which is pretty much in line with our expectations. So about, call it 2 billion out of the 50 billion of ad revenue. So it's moving in the right direction, but 2 billion out of 50, it's only going to be about 4% of their revenues this year.
Perhaps the juicier news is what's going on with Warner Brothers Discovery, which appears to be open to a sale. The stock's up more than 9%. And most interesting to me, CNBC reported that Netflix could be a buyer. They could buy WBD. Any reactions to what we saw with Warner Brothers?
We sort of penciled out all the math on what a Warner Brothers sale could be worth, and it was $20 to $28 was the range that we came up with. The unique facet of this that is maybe hard to digest but really important for these strategics is think about the 5 major apps that are out in the ecosystem today, right? You've got Netflix as the winner, Disney's sort of in the middle, and then you have 3 what I'll call loser apps, which is Peacock, Paramount, and Max. That 3 number is really important because it's an odd number. And so when you see Warner Brothers put a for sale sign out there, whoever buys it, whether it's Peacock, which is owned by Comcast, or Paramount, someone else is going to be left without the requisite scale to compete in the future of video delivery. That puts sort of a scarcity value, I think, to Warner Brothers, and that's why I'm not surprised to see the stock up, and I won't be surprised if it gets sold. Regarding Netflix, I put very low odds that Netflix ends up buying Warner Brothers, and the reason is simple. Netflix is undeniably on the hunt for intellectual property. but it's very expensive to go out and buy a full film studio, a full television studio, and sort of a loser app to sort of get your way to the intellectual property. So I would put very low odds that Netflix ends up being the contender, the winner for this asset, and just focus on those three loser apps. One of those, I think, will probably get it, and it'll put them in a better position to compete with Netflix.
Who do you think the buyer would be? I know Comcast has been floated, also David Ellison. Do you have any thoughts on who is the most likely?
Yeah, I guess when the Ellisons first bought Paramount, our assumption, and I think Wall Street's assumption, was that the company would essentially become a scaled up Sony. And what I mean by that is just an arms dealer, meaning they would produce films and TV shows for other people's apps. What that meant is the street expected Paramount to go out and sell the CBS TV stations they own, sell the CBS broadcast network, sell the linear cable nets, and just sort of keep the Paramount film and TV studio part. What happened after the deal closed is they went out and paid $1 billion for some sports rights. And then the Ellisons started coming out and saying, hey, they're going for it, right? They think that there's a lot of money to be made in the streaming business. And so that caused us to sort of totally recalibrate our thinking. So we have a 60% likelihood that Paramount walks away as the winning bidder for Warner Brothers. And the backup, the next most likely would be Comcast, but it's only 15% likelihood in our view.
It seems, though, based on the dynamics you just described, where there is a sense of scarcity and therefore a lot of demand, it sounds like Zaslav would want to sell. Do you think that's right?
Oh, 100%. So I don't want to make this too long, but if I go back to the middle of 24, the buy side was asking every single media company, we need to consolidate apps. We need to consolidate apps. Can you participate in it? They knew Warner Brothers couldn't do it because there was too much debt. They knew Paramount couldn't consolidate because they had too much debt. And then all eyes landed on Comcast because they had a lean balance sheet. And what Comcast said is, we don't want to buy any more declining linear cable networks. And so the next thing that Comcast announced is they were spinning off their linear cable networks. It's a new entity called Versant. And I want to say it was 2 weeks after that, Warner Brothers said that they were going to split up into two pieces. Their linear cable nets would trade separately from studio and streaming. That was essentially hanging a for sale sign out around Warner Brothers' neck. Essentially, Versant would buy the bad part of Warner Brothers, and then Comcast parent would buy the streaming app and the studio. That was the operating assumption everyone had until Ellison showed up. And I think what he's saying is, look, I'll buy the whole thing potentially today. You don't have to go through this brain damage of splitting it into two. And now the onus is back on Brian Roberts at Comcast. Does he want to buy all of Warner Brothers as opposed to just the part that he wanted, or let it go to Ellison? And I think for Netflix, the reason I put such low odds down there is they're not going to buy all of Warner Brothers, right? Just to get the good part of Warner Brothers. So it's a little bit of a game of chicken is almost the way I describe it. Who's going to take the bad part of Warner Brothers to get the good part? And the more temerity you have to swallow the whole enchilada, the more likely you are to get it.
We saw the stock decline in Netflix, but still trading at 53 times earnings, more than a $500 billion market cap. It is the juggernaut, more than Disney, Comcast, Warner Brothers Discovery put together.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the valuations in streaming right now? Do you have any thoughts on whether any of these are perhaps overvalued, perhaps Netflix? What do you make of the valuations in entertainment right now?
What I would say is that the context is really important. So I'm gonna give you just a little bit of context to understand how we got here in terms of valuations. If you roll the clock back to 2024 with the big mega cap tech names, PMs that own those forever suddenly were confronted with a lot of risks that they never faced before. You had the tariff risk. You had government intervention in terms of breaking some of these big tech companies up. You had AI risk was a big new thing, and you had recession risk. So what portfolio managers said to their analysts is, give me a tech stock that has no recession risk, no AI risk, no DOJ risk, and no tariff risk. And everybody landed on Netflix because it's sort of a tech company that didn't have any of those attributes. That caused the multiple to expand a lot during the back half of 24 and into 25. The period that we're in now is Netflix is just sort of growing into that very elevated multiple. So I'm neutral on Netflix. I don't think it's particularly compelling value right now. If I could just put a fine point just to illustrate what the buy side was saying, in the spring of 24, the bull case on Netflix was 25 times 25 earnings of $25 a share. So 25 times 25, 625. By the time we got to the summer of this year, the bull case on Netflix was a 40 multiple on $40 a share for 2027. So 1600. And you have to ask yourself, why did we go from 25 times to 40 times? It's not that, Netflix was the winner 18 months ago, right? So what changed? And what changed was tariff risk, recession risk, DOJ risk, AI risk. It was stuff around Netflix. It wasn't Netflix related.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. We could probably do a whole episode on Netflix with you. Jason Bazinet, Managing Director of Media and Entertainment Research at Citigroup, just on your behalf. Currently, Atlas is only available for Mac users, but versions for Windows, iOS, and Android are expected to roll out soon. Most interestingly, Google stock fell more than 3% on this announcement. So, for more on this new product from OpenAI, we are speaking with Alex Heath, author of the Sources newsletter, co-host of the Access podcast. Alex, thank you for joining us again on Prof Markets.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
So I haven't tried this yet, ChatGPT Atlas, but everyone's talking about it. What did we learn about this new product, this new browser from OpenAI? What are the main features?
It's mainly ChatGPT embedded in the browser. So there's a sidebar where you can chat with it like you would in the ChatGPT app. But the key difference is that it understands the context of your browser. It can see what's in a tab, even agentically act within that tab, but also summarize it, infer what's in it, make connections across tabs, use AI to search your history, all that stuff.
As someone who uses these products a lot, I assume, do you think that it is a useful product? Is it a powerful product?
I think the jury's out on how powerful it will be. I think it depends on the implementation of particularly the reasoning models. There's this preview agent mode that they're allowing for people on the pro tier where it can do things, not just read and summarize or infer things off of a page, but do things through a page. That's going to be really interesting to try. This is a thing, this whole field of like AI browsers is a thing that's really heated up in the last 6 months or so. Perplexity has one called Comet that I've used that I'm actually a fan of. I've used it to do some pretty advanced agentic stuff and it works pretty well. And then the browser company had Dia before that. And then there's a bunch of startups trying this. Everyone has coalesced around this idea of bringing the chatbot into the browser because it has so much more context. And I think it's smart for OpenAI to do this. It was only a matter of time.
The company you left out there would be Google. And of course, we saw a decline in the stock after this came out. How is this different from what Google offers? How is this different from, say, using Gemini on Google Chrome?
Yeah, so I have the Gemini button in my Chrome window I'm looking at here, and it's okay. It's pretty basic. It can't really do things in the browser yet. I think a company as large as Google has a lot of regulatory risk, privacy, safety, security risks that a startup like OpenAI is either not beholden to or willing to ignore. And so Google's treading a little more lightly here, but everyone is going here. I mean, I think within a year or two, like everyone's browser is going to act more like the chatbot that we think of for AI today, which will reshape the web, no question. But yeah, Google is behind. I think it's we saw. It was like $100 billion off the market cap. Pretty wild. Probably an overreaction. I mean, the OpenAI browser is based on Chromium, which is the open source substrate of Chrome, which allows you to take all of your Chrome context, your bookmarks, your logins, your passwords, your extensions even, and instantly port them over to Atlas, the ChatGPT browser. So in a way, Google is, due to the open source nature of Chromium, it's kind of giving away its market here.
I was just going to ask you about that. I was going to ask, one, what you thought of the stock dropping. It sounds like you think it was an overreaction. And then, yes, this Chromium situation, their open source engine that Chrome is built on, Google's Chrome is built on, but which OpenAI clearly needs access to as well. For their browser. And if you have a relationship with Google like I do and like most of us do, and you want to port all of your data over to ChatGPT, I mean, it sounds like Google owns that relationship. So I guess my question is, what level of leverage does Google have because of this Chromium infrastructure, this open source engine, and could they use it against ChatGPT?
The thing that I could see them doing is limiting Atlas's ability to interface with their web applications, so Gmail, Calendar, or at least give preference to Gemini in that scenario on their owned operated surfaces. So Maps too. I mean, think about they have so many products that have billions of users. YouTube, for example, if they made it more difficult for a competitor agentic browser to use those web apps, I could see that being an issue. It would probably also be an antitrust issue, but that said, Google just got the out of jail free card from the government on antitrust, essentially. So maybe that means that they could do something like that. I do think the stock was an overreaction just because, OpenAI is not like replacing ChatGPT with this browser, right? This is a new app. It's Mac only to start. Eventually, it will come to Windows and mobile platforms. But it's also, all the features are restricted behind, or all of them, the pro ones are restricted behind the paid tier. So it's not a full-on assault on Chrome yet. It's not to say that it won't be, but I mean, I think if OpenAI starts to replace Gmail, if it starts to replace Google Maps, that sort of thing, then Google has a real threat on its hands. But
Right.
no one has managed to unseat the duopoly. Really, it's just a monopoly, but I guess you could say duopoly of browsers with Chrome and Safari over the last 15, 20 years. So
Yeah.
maybe AI is that opportunity, but I think it's early to tell. I do think what's obvious though is that we are going to have our chatbot interfaces integrated in the browser everywhere going forward.
You mentioned a few of these new browsers. Perplexity had their browser. You mentioned the browser company, which I saw was recently purchased by Atlassian for more than $600 million. How important, I mean, it appears that the browser wars are beginning. How important are browsers? How big of a deal are the browser wars? How important is it as a tech company to be the number one browser?
It's critical. I mean, if you think of Google's longevity and their success, I'm not sure where they'd be without Chrome. It gives them a tremendous data flywheel for search, for their advertising business model. It gives default status to Google search on a distribution surface that touches billions of people via Chrome and all the devices that Chrome is on. So it's a massive distribution play. And it's a massive data play. And the most interesting thing about the Atlas browser, Ed, is that the data from your ChatGPT memory, your context in ChatGPT, goes to the browser and then vice versa. So the more you use the browser, the more ChatGPT knows about you, the better prompt responses it will give you in the chatbot. And the more you use it in ChatGPT, the model will then be able to use your browser for you in a more personalized way. That's a real moat, that data and that context. And the last time I was on the show, we were talking about advertising and OpenAI looking at advertising. This is going to help them build a tremendous database of profiles on people to target advertising to, where not only now do they have your prompt history with ChatGPT, but they're going to have your browsing history.
Right.
And what does that give them in the long run? A tremendous data flywheel.
If you had to bet Atlas versus Chrome, what are you betting on?
I think it's too early to tell. I think it's all execution at this point. I think OpenAI has to ship Atlas on all the other surfaces. You can't just be on Mac. It needs to be on mobile. And Chrome, it's just people don't switch browsers every day. This isn't like some random app like Sora or To-Do List or something like that. Like browsers are really embedded in how we live and work and use the internet and use technology. So I think it will take a lot of time. Not to say that OpenAI doesn't have a shot. Look, 800 million users, they send a push alert to every ChatGPT user to go download Atlas. That's a powerful lever that they have, but you still have to go take the effort to download something, install it, set it up. And to do that for hundreds of millions of people will take a lot of time. So it's hard to say. I do think calling the end of Chrome right now is very premature.
All right. Alex Heath, author of the Sources newsletter and co-host of the Access podcast. Always appreciate your time. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
So OpenAI's long-awaited browser is finally here. And with it, Sam Altman is clearly sending a message to Google. And the message is, we are coming for your lunch. A message which, by the way, many investors believe. Google stock dipped nearly 4% on the product announcement. The stock did rebound later in the day. Looks like it could rise some more today on this news of a potential deal with Anthropic. But clearly, many Google investors were very concerned about what Atlas could mean for Google and for the browser Google Chrome, which is a fair concern. But to Alex's point, let's just take a step back and let's just remind ourselves of how dominant Google really is and how dominant it has been. This company still has a 90+% market share in the search market, which despite the arrival of ChatGPT, which everyone was so worried about, despite that, the market share has remained resilient. In fact, as of May, Google search traffic was up 49% year over year, and it was 96 times higher than traffic to ChatGPT. In addition to the search business, which is still doing really well, they have all of their other businesses. They own YouTube, which is, as we've discussed, the world's most popular streaming service. It commands more TV viewing time than Netflix and Disney Plus combined. They're also leading in AI with Gemini, which, according to multiple benchmarks and according to prediction markets, is the best performing AI model in the world right now. They have a digital ad network, which also maintains 90% market share. They own Waymo, America's largest commercial robotaxi service, operating in 5 cities, testing in 17 others. And then they own products like Google Drive and Gmail and Google Maps, products so intrinsic to the internet that OpenAI actually had to use them throughout their entire demo of Atlas. All of this, and yet Google trades at around 27 times earnings, less than Amazon, less than Microsoft, and significantly less than Apple. In fact, it is less than the average of the NASDAQ, roughly in line with the S&P average. So yes, OpenAI is clearly setting its sights on Google, but does one live stream of a pilot product, one which Google could probably recreate and which is already quite similar to the browser they already have, does that really warrant the erasure of more than $100 billion in market value? We don't think so. We were long Google at $200 a share since.
I'm deeply concerned about what that portends for the country. And it seems like they are using that almost immediately as a way to crack down on the left, and that is going to become the mission in all of this.
I had seen J.D. Vance guest host Charlie Kirk's program, and he railed against unity in it. He kept saying, we reject unity with people who do X or people who do Y. And that is the exact opposite of how you're supposed to react. You're supposed to respect people's grief, not by exploiting them, not by trying to turn them against their fellow Americans. I don't think that there are many people who saw that video and whose first reaction was, we need more division. But that is what he was preaching. And if I think back to how President Biden reacted after an assassin tried to take the life of President Trump, he said, we all need to come together. Political violence is always wrong. We all share bonds as Americans that we need to keep front of mind. Or if you think about Barack Obama, after Dylan Roof shot many members of a Black congregation in South Carolina, where he sang Amazing Grace and called for people to come together. And I think that while the news cycle is volatile and many things will happen between now and then, I think that if Vance tries to run in the 2028 cycle, I think that is a very telling moment about what are your real convictions, what are your real values, because it is an insult to every American who has been harmed by political violence, whatever their point of view was, to try and use it to fuel more anger and more division.
Yeah, I mean, not to play I live in conservative media devil's advocate, but the right has a list of things that they say that we in the Democratic Party has done to marginalize and to demean and to demonize the right. And they would say that President Biden, how he called out MAGA Republicans and the MAGA base all the time, was part of the problem. And they've been going back to the radicalization that happened, under Barack Obama. For instance, Megyn Kelly was talking about that. And as someone who served in the Biden administration, how would you respond to those accusations that, these divisions have been fomented for a long time, and that Democrats are guilty as well of demonizing an enormous subsection of the Republican Party?
One of the biggest problems with the way the Trump administration is talking to the country is they are often treating people like they're stupid. and they are not stupid. You see this with the Epstein files, how they were promising for years transparency on the Epstein files. Then once they come into power, you see the opposite, and we still have no idea what is really in those and what is about Trump in them. But I think that Americans are proud of the fact that we are a democracy that values debate, and they understand that there are always going to be contrasts that people who are running for office make with one another and that parties make with one another. But what we need to do is look at the specific rhetoric, like you're getting at. Joe Biden would say that he disagreed with MAGA Republicans, as he put it, and he would separate that from what he called mainstream Republicans. And when he was walking through what he found concerning about MAGA Republicans, it was the explicit support for violence, like how on January 6th, there were members of the Capitol Police Force who lost their lives. That mob wanted to kill Mike Pence. They wanted to kill Republican members of Congress. And that goes to the core of what he was talking about, that we have to say that's not who we are. And I remember there was a moment in the 2020 campaign after the turmoil after George Floyd was killed. He would repeatedly say, by he I mean President Biden, we have to always reject political violence. Protest must be peaceful. And there were some voices like DSA in Portland put out a statement condemning Joe Biden for saying that violence is always unacceptable. They had some argument that in some cases it was. And I couldn't disagree with that more. And I think that if you map out what are people saying about one another, it is hard to argue that what's called for now is the kind of charged rhetoric that you're seeing from the president and the vice president and their allies trying to exploit a tragedy to go after Americans who disagree with their policies. It's literally just about one of the least American things that you can do.
Yeah, and they're getting very serious about it. So we have this $15 billion defamation lawsuit Donald Trump has filed against the New York Times, saying that they're virtually the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party. We had Pam Bondi saying that we can prosecute hate speech. She walked it back, but then, Trump being Trump, he basically said, no, that's actually totally fine. We have Deputy AG Todd Blanche threatening to use RICO against left-wing groups that even disturb the president's meals. Where do you think all of this leads?
I don't think it's leading anywhere good when you look at the way they're acting. Like you said last night, I saw that exchange where Caitlin Collins was interviewing Todd Blanche.
So is it, again, sheer happenstance that individuals show up at a restaurant where the president is trying to enjoy dinner in Washington, D.C., and accost him with vile words and vile anger, and meanwhile he's simply trying to have dinner? Does it mean it's just completely random that they showed up? Maybe, but to the extent that it's part of an organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage to the United States, there's potential investigations there.
And she reminded him correctly that every American has the right to protest their government. That is fundamental. And every president of our lifetimes has been protested. I don't know of anybody else whose team has tried to say that protesting them should be a crime equal in magnitude to terrorism, organized crime. I think that that's just the kind of thing people hear it, and it makes them concerned about their rights. And their right to be. It made me concerned in that way. I remember there were events where people were chanting, quote, "fuck Joe Biden." Joe Biden did not ever, and nor did anybody on his team, talk about that should be criminalized, that shouldn't be allowed. Americans have the right to do that. I went to protests of President George W. Bush when I was in college because I disagreed with the Iraq War. That is something every American has a fundamental right to do.
Do you see a difference in the way the media is handling the Trump administration versus how they interacted with the Biden administration? I've heard accusations, obviously, of acquiescing in some ways, like CBS paying that $16 million fine, kind of just to get them off their back. And there has been a chilling effect throughout media organizations. What's your take on how they're interacting with the administration?
To me, I think it gets at a double standard that still has to be addressed at a high level in mainstream media. It takes me back to, there was a moment in 2016 when Matt Lauer interviewed Hillary Clinton and then Donald Trump back to back. And there was a very different tone in his questioning of the two of them. With Trump, it was basically like, what is your favorite color balloon? And with Hillary, it was, why did you kill all those people in Benghazi? Right? It was just night and day. And I think that there's been some soul searching in the almost 10 years since that time. But if you take a step back and you diagram out how do they treat Trump in general versus how do they treat whichever Democratic opponent or opponents he is vying with at that time, there is not equal treatment. Trump is given much more regurgitation in coverage, including when he says things that are demonstrably untrue, when he says things that an outlet's own investigative reporting has debunked. I remember there was a New York Times article over the weekend, which goes to the conversation we're having about cracking down on free speech, where
From the Commerce Department showed sales rose 0.6% from July. That is double what economists forecasted. As expected, the reaction across most media outlets was one of optimism. CNN said, against the odds, Americans are still spending. Axios, quote, retail sales surprise as Americans increase spending in August. Quote, consumers continue to open their wallets. Despite rocky labor market conditions, we also saw a lot of celebrating on social media too. However, there was another piece of data that came out yesterday, which should probably change your conclusions. This data came from our friend Mark Zandi of Moody's Analytics, who found that as of this quarter, the top 10% of earners in America now account for 49.2% of all consumer spending. That is the highest number in history. You compare it to 30 years ago, when the top 10% accounted for roughly a third of consumer spending. Put another way, this retail data might look good. You might think the American consumer is doing well, they're spending their money, until you realize it's actually not Americans that are spending, but rich Americans that are spending. Whatever growth we saw in retail last month is basically just the top 10% of America doing all the heavy lifting. It's rich people that are creating these encouraging numbers. And of course, that isn't very encouraging at all. So, here to unpack this new data, we are bringing on the guy who dug in and analyzed this data, the one and only Mark Zandi. Mark, thank you for joining me again on Prof G Markets.
Anytime, mate. Good to be on.
So I want to get into this analysis. You know, we saw this retail sales data which just came out, which gives you this image that the consumer's doing well in America. We're spending money more than we were last week. But then you also have this analysis which shows that half of the spending is the top 10% of Americans. And that's the highest share ever. So just your initial reactions to that data that you found, what does it tell us about the US economy right now?
Yeah, the American economy is very dependent on the well-to-do, the folks that have a high income, high net worth. They're driving the train, and more so than I think anyone would have thought. So the folks in the top 10% of the income distribution. So you're making well over $250,000 a year. They account for almost half of all the spending. And it's even more top-heavy than that. If you look at the folks that are in the top 3.3% of the income distribution, don't ask me why we picked that cutoff, but we did. They account for about 25% of the spending. So the American economy is moving forward. It's not in recession, but obviously it's the folks at the tippity top of the income distribution, the wealth distribution, that are driving the train.
This to me feels like this tells the story of America, in my view. I mean, the chart, if we're watching on YouTube, we should pull the chart up. But the chart really tells the story where you had the top 10%, contributing to a third of the spending. And then the line keeps going up and keeps going up, keeps going up. And now it's hit 50%. Does this concern you at all? What were your reactions when you collected this?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with it on a number of levels. I mean, one, it means, from a macroeconomic perspective, that the U.S. economy is very dependent on a very small group of high income, high net worth households. And if they slip up for whatever reason, let's say the stock market corrects, goes down 10, 20, 30%, stays down, those folks are going to turn more cautious. And it's not like they're going to, curtail their spending. They're very, very well off, but they'll turn more cautious, the so-called negative wealth effects. And that'll be a real threat to the economy because the economy is obviously already struggling very significantly. And then, of course, the folks in the bottom and middle parts of the income distribution, they're struggling to make ends meet. Their income, their spending is barely keeping pace, if at all, with the rate of inflation. So the real spending hasn't increased. And that obviously creates all kinds of societal issues. And I think goes at least partially explaining our fractured politics, which obviously has all kinds of implications. So there's numerous implications of this, none of them good.
How much of this is because of the increases we've seen in the stock market? I mean, just looking at this data, you've got the bottom 80% who have increased their spending the past 4 years by around 25%. And you think that sounds maybe promising, but inflation is pretty much at that level. So they're basically just tracking with prices. Top 10%, their spending is up 60% in the past 4 years. So they're spending more than ever. How much of that is because asset prices have gone up? We're looking at record highs in the stock market. Housing prices have obviously gone up too. Is this a story of my stocks are up and therefore I'm more confident and I'm more willing to spend?
I think that's a big part of it. Economists call it the wealth effect. I mean, people are wealthier, feel wealthier. They have more resource to go out and spend. I mean, they can borrow against that wealth. Many of the highest income households, that's what they do. They borrow against their wealth and spend, and they feel more confident. I mean, as they, should. I mean, they're sitting on a pretty large nest egg, and if that nest egg is getting bigger, if stock prices are rising, housing values appreciating, then it makes them more willing to spend. So it's both being more willing and able to spend, and that's what they do. And of course, asset prices are up a lot. Stock prices are at record highs, catapulted higher here. AI is driving a lot of that, but there's, plenty of stockholder wealth. Housing values have also risen quite considerably. They're up almost 60% since the pandemic hit. And that's nationwide. So, in parts of the country, they're up 70, 80, 90%. So, yeah, people are feeling not wealthy. And these folks, they don't owe anything. If they own a mortgage, it's only because it's free money. They got it at the mortgage back in the pandemic, 2.5%, 3.5%. So it's kind of effectively free money. They don't have any credit card debt. They don't own debt on their auto. They're not at all, sensitive to the higher interest rates on debt. So, you add it all up, that I think is largely the explanation for why they're out spending as aggressively as they are and why they're accounting for such a high share of overall spending.
There's almost two parts to this story. One is the reliance and the dependence that our economy is leaning on rich people. The fact that basically half of the economic activity is rich people. But then there's another side to this, which is, as I said, we just saw this retail sales data and the data looks good. But there's this possibility that actually the data that we're hearing and we're getting from our government on the economy is kind of useless in a way, in that it's only really or increasingly only reflecting the behaviors of rich people, which is only a small subset of the entire population. And so there's this other dynamic here where you have data coming in, but you can't really trust the data because, how much of that is impacted by rich people, by the top 10%, or as you said, the top 3.3%. And I'm wondering if there are any other examples of economic data that you're seeing where the data comes out, we all go, oh, good, things look good, America's doing great. And then you dig in and you realize, no, it's not America, it's wealthy America.
Oh, this is a age-old problem, right, in economics. I mean, you look at the averages and the means and the medians, like in the middle of the distribution, and you say, oh, no problem, everything's fine. Like take the banking crisis back, now almost 2.5 years ago. If you looked at, capital ratios for the banking system or the or return on equity or profitability, you go, oh, no problem. But then you go look at the distribution and you look at the tails of the distribution, who's at one end and the other, you go, oh my gosh, you got a real problem. It's Silicon Valley Bank or, First Republic. Same deal here. We're looking at the averages, the means, the medians, kind of the middle of the distribution, but the distribution's all skewed. So it's giving you it's not a picture that's not representative of the reality of what the world feels like for most Americans. And this goes perhaps to why most Americans, I think, are feeling pretty, punk about the economy. This isn't working for me. And you look at the average, you go, well, what's the problem? Everyone's got a job, but well, this is the problem. Their spending hasn't been able to keep up or just barely kept up with the pace of inflation, over the past 5-6 years.
I'm wondering to what extent you think this should be affecting our central bank policy. I mean, when this episode airs, the Fed will be meeting later in the day, and we're going to get most likely a rate cut. Does this change your views at all? I mean, the idea that we're getting this positive retail data, we're getting signs that spending is increasing, but then it's actually only really just rich people who are increasing their spending. I'm wondering if your position on Fed policy might be changing at all as a result of these findings, or perhaps not.
Not in the near term. I mean, I do think, front and center for the Fed, as it should be, is the job market. And the job market is flagging. There's been no effective job growth in recent months. And that's even before we get all the revisions in, which are almost certainly going to show that the economy's been losing jobs, not consistently, but for a number of months. So, if you're in that kind of world where the job market has gone flat, I think you need to start addressing that, particularly in the context, if I'm at the Fed, particularly in the context of Fed independence, because if we go into recession, they're going to get blamed. And, it's going to be existential for their independence, which is already under tremendous pressure. So I think they need to ease, and they need to ease fast. But, I don't think it's the Fed's job to fix this problem we have with the income and wealth distribution. That's not, they don't have the tools to do that. They have the tools to keep the economy moving forward in aggregate, but they can't address these, broader equity distributional issues. That's in the purview of Congress and the administration. That goes to the tax code. That goes to government spending and who benefits, who doesn't benefit, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Just while we have you, do you have any predictions for this Fed meeting? I mean, 96% of Wall Street would say 25 basis point cut, but you've also got the president saying it should be bigger than that.
Yeah, they'll cut. It's baked, 25 basis point, a quarter point. I mean, there has been some conversation around 50 basis points, a half a percentage point. I don't think we're going to get there, at least not this go around. I mean, I do think the preponderance of the members of the Fed believe that, they should cut, but they need to be wary of inflation. It is picking up. Yeah, it should be temporary because of the tariffs. And once the tariffs stabilize, inflation should come back in. But, that's a forecast, and it's a pretty tenuous one in the context of pretty fragile inflation expectations. So they need to be careful. So I think it's a quarter point. But the other thing is they got another meeting in 6 weeks, and another one that's in October, another one in December. So, if things don't get back on the rails here and the job market continues to weaken and the economy more broadly looks like it's going to flag, then they can cut more aggressively. But at this point, I suspect 25 basis points.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. Really appreciate this. And I will say that analysis was very eye-opening for me. 50%. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ed.
That was Mark Zandi, Chief Economist at Moody's Analytics. Bottom line, there are many stories that you can tell yourself about the economy right now, and there are many rosy stories you can tell yourself about the economy. We can look at the retail sales that we just saw. We can look at GDP growth. We can look at the stock market hitting all-time highs, and we can say that the consumer is more resilient than ever, that spending is going up. And that is true, but for only a small subset of people. The reality that we must increasingly understand is that we live in a bifurcated economy where there are a handful of wealthy households that are spending, that are buying stocks, that are driving growth and pushing all of these numbers up. But behind that data, there is a darker story happening. A story of the years that a sitting White House official has served on the board of the Fed. Myron is currently set to serve only the remaining months of former Governor Adriana Kugler's term, which ends in January. He is currently taking part in this week's Fed meeting, where the governors are voting on a potential rate cut. Okay, question. Who is Stephen Myron? And how did this active White House official end up getting a job at the Federal Reserve? Well, let's dig in. Let's review his story. Stephen Myron's career really began in college, where he got his bachelor's in economics at Boston University. He then went on to a PhD in economics at Harvard, where he studied under a former economic advisor to Reagan and one of the core architects of Reaganomics. After that, he took a job in finance, first at a small investment firm, then Fidelity, then a hedge fund called Sovanum. And it was at Sovanum where many of his political convictions really started to become clear, especially to his colleagues. In fact, so clear that it apparently became a bit of a problem. His colleagues said they, quote, worried that Myron's investment decisions could be negatively influenced by his politics. This did eventually lead to a career in the public sector. During the pandemic, he got a position working as an advisor on pandemic relief programs. He later started writing opinion pieces for think tanks and investment firms. One of those pieces was entitled A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System, and that was important for two main reasons. One, it caught the attention of Trump's circle, which led to his appointment as one of his economic advisors. And two, it was almost an exact blueprint of Trump's tariff policy. This was really the moment that clarified Myron's economic agenda, and that was follow the leader, go with Trump. And now that he is in the White House, that agenda has only progressed. For example, he has long been holding the position that tariffs actually won't cause inflation. And just last month, he doubled down on that position on CNBC.
Look, there's just still continues to be no evidence whatsoever of any tariff-induced inflation. I think lots of folks who are expecting that, who are predicting doom and gloom, it just hasn't panned out, and it continues to not pan out for them.
Just to note, that isn't true. We are seeing tariff-induced inflation. That is why inflation is rising, and it is specifically rising in goods that are most sensitive to tariffs. He also recently became one of Jerome Powell's greatest critics. He publicly disavowed Powell's interest rate decisions, and he has also been publicly praising Trump's decisions. He said that Trump has made, quote, a series of excellent calls on monetary policy. But his most aggressive stances and perhaps most consequential are his stances on the Fed itself. Specifically, he wants the executive branch to have more control over monetary policy, whether that is through shortening the Fed's term limits or putting state governors in charge of the reserve banks, or through giving the president, quote, increased oversight on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The idea is really to place more political pressure on the Fed, which is, of course, exactly what Trump wants to do. Now, does he believe this because he thinks it's actually good policy? Or does he believe it because he wants to get into Trump's good graces? We can't know for sure, but one quote from a former colleague is quite striking. Quote, Myron is a well-meaning person who understands that his job requires some intellectual backflips and occasional public worship. Now, the final piece to note, and this is the most unusual piece, as we said, Stephen Myron already has a position in the White House. That is unusual. What is more unusual is that he actually isn't resigning from that position. The plan is to take what they're calling an unpaid leave, complete his term at the Fed, and then return to the White House. But crucially, he isn't actually giving up the position. He's still in that post. Put another way, the Fed's independence is, at this point, kind of compromised. Not in a huge, dramatic way, but the fact of the matter is, the White House has now installed one of its own officials into the Fed. Now, the extent to which this individual will actually influence our monetary policy, that remains to be seen. But what probably matters more here is the precedent. This is the first time we've seen this kind of arrangement, but if this, combined with the attempted firing of the other Fed governor, Lisa Cook, if that is any indicator of maturity that it takes to actually build wealth in a real way versus the guy who just ran into some money. And I feel like that's something that young people don't understand, and it's leading men into very weird and bad places where we think that if we to get the girl, screw vocational training. They don't care about guys who make, $75,000, $80,000 a year. I need to run into $1 million. So how am I going to get there? And I wonder if that's not even what is attractive.
Yeah, the solid guy who's making a good living and is a kind person and did it on his own through his discipline and his hard work and is in good shape and is a nice man and demonstrates kindness and has good relationship with his parents and is patriotic, I think that guy's just fine and he's going to attract a high caliber mate. I do think that. In cities like New York, London, or LA, it's a little bit different because you just need to make so much money to just even live there. But what you said about, maybe it's a good thing that men are inspired to be economically successful. I think it's good to a point. And that is, I think a lot of pressure on men to be economically viable is probably a good thing. You need to get your shit together. Okay, you're not graduating from college. All right, what are you going to do? You're going to do an apprenticeship program? What are you going to do? Like, that pressure is probably a good thing. And the basis of capitalism is people feel a lot of incentives, which is Latin for pressure on the upside and the downside, to be successful and work hard and figure shit out and try and make it work. The problem is, I think the pressure and the expectations have become totally irrational. And that is, everyone is vomiting their faux wealth on me all day long. It feels like everybody else is making a shit ton of money but me. So I have a lack of self-esteem. And because of poor government policies and economic policies, we have let inflation run amok. We've let education skyrocket in costs. We've made it nearly impossible for new entrants into the housing market. And we've just set up a younger generation of people to feel really bad about themselves on an economic level, which disproportionately impacts the self-esteem of young men.
I think these conversations, they're fun and they're interesting because they get at the heart of what it means to be a person. I think that's why it's so triggering and it generates so much heat because, I don't know, it gets at what it means to love and to be loved, how to be understood, appreciated as a person, how to be a member of society. Like, it gets to all of the deep stuff. But it's so true that there is a vision of masculinity that some people believe is really great, like Trump, like Elon, and it is a direction that we might actually be headed in. Nick Fuentes would be another example. So you are kind of spearheading the other side of it. For someone who is really shaping a generation of men and what it means to be a man, if you could just summarize, what do you want them to walk away with? What do you want them to walk away with from this conversation? What should be the takeaway?
It's a generous question, and there's sort of two things popped into my mind, and that is a really valuable piece of feedback I've received from the book is that, all right, protector, provider, procreator, aren't women also protectors? Like, isn't that a key component of femininity? And it's true. And now that women are making more money, as they should, can't they also be providers? Yeah, there's nuance to each, right? Different forms of protection and providing and procreating and who's the initiator. There's different forms of it. But where I think I'm evolving to on this is that masculinity and femininity all overlap around just trying to be a better human. That to be a better man in many ways is just to try and be a better human. And that maybe where I maybe made a mistake here is trying to define stark lines between people born as males or females. And I do think there is differences. I think there's predisposed behaviors we're more prone to. But maybe it's not trying to form, I'd like to think of an aspirational form of masculinity and femininity have this huge overlap around just being just humanity, just being better humans. But to your question of what the one takeaway around what I've written about trying to establish an aspirational form of masculinity, it comes down to this notion that Richard Reeves taught me, and that is surplus value. A lot of people, a lot of males go their whole life and never become men. They die having never become men. And in my view, the metric is not a religious ceremony or age or experiences or money. It's this term surplus value. And that is, do you create more economic value and tax revenue than you absorb? Every day you leave the house, you're absorbing hundreds of dollars of other people's taxpayer money if you expect to go on the roads or expect someone to answer if you call for an ambulance. Are you creating more economic value? That's one way to add surplus value. Are you absorbing more complaints than you're giving? Are you the kind of person that people come to and want guidance, want comfort? Are you providing more comfort than's been given to you? Are you providing more love and more care for other people than have been provided for you? Do you notice people's lives? Do you have the ability to really see people where they are, understand them, and then add value to their lives, even if maybe they're not noticing or as many people aren't noticing your life? Are you a better father to your son than your father was to you? Once you are adding surplus value, that's where you become a man.
I think that's a good place to end, but I want to just ask you another question. When do you think that you became a man? You said that some people go through their whole lives and they never become a man. Was there a moment for you where you realized, I think I'm a man now?
I never thought, okay, now I'm a man with some Cat Stevens song in the back. It's very passé, but it comes down, the two big moments for me where I think I started to kind of slip into manhood were one when my mom got sick, just recognizing I needed to step up and I needed to take care of my mom. And again, a lot of it came back to economics for me. I think I've told you the story. My mom got very sick. I couldn't afford to get her a nurse. It was just very humiliating and upsetting for me. And I got very serious about getting my shit together such that I could take care of my mom, because she had always taken care of me. And I think I assumed, oh, that's just the way of the world. People take care of me. That was a wake-up call that I needed. And then not when I had kids, but a few years after, when I realized, okay, you're not going to have fabulous brunch with amazing hot people this weekend because you're taking care of your kids, and they're awful and they're selfish and they're assholes. But that's what this whole shooting match is about, is you're there to go to the seventh circle of hell called a birthday party for 2-year-olds and see all the other dads finally giving their wives an afternoon off. But like thinking, okay, for the first time in my life with kids, I've thought, administration in a safe way, how to fundraise when you're not as connected, and my thoughts on religion. First question.
Hey, Prof G Media team. I live in New York City. I currently work at Salesforce. In our company at All Hands yesterday, Mark Benioff made a crude and inappropriate joke about ICE. My question to you is, outside of resisting and unsubscribing, what can we do as employees to speak out while protecting ourselves from retribution? I want to speak up, but I want to do it in a way that is respectful and calls the kettle black. I do have a blog and I've been toying with posting something, but very recently a coworker was fired from Salesforce back in September while posting on her social media about the Charlie Kirk assassination. I feel the same for myself if I post something. Thanks for fighting the good fight. I know I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but thank you for the thoughtful question. So just some background on what happened at Salesforce. At an internal company kickoff event in Las Vegas, Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff made a remark joking that ICE agents were present to monitor international employees, a comment many staff felt was deeply inappropriate. The joke triggered significant internal backlash, with more than 1,400 Salesforce workers signing a letter urging leadership to publicly denounce ICE and end any business ties with the agency. That's from CNBC. So tech has been the epicenter of employee activism around defense contracts, immigration enforcement tech, surveillance tools, climate exposure, and fossil fuel relationships. So some employee tactics: open letters, often with hundreds to thousands of signatures, walkouts and coordinated protests. I personally hate those. Like, talk about entitled douchebags. Oh, I'm going to walk out over lunch. Okay. Wow, that'll show them. Internal petitions and ethics complaints, media leaks to force transparency, organized employee coalitions inside companies. So we've seen a renewed wave of tech worker activism this year, particularly around immigration enforcement and government partnerships. Most recently, 900 Google employees signed an open letter condemning recent actions by ICE and CBP officers, urging the company to disclose its dealings with the agencies and divest from them. In January, workers and executives representing Amazon, Spotify, Meta, among others, wrote a similar letter demanding ICE out of their cities. Oh, God. Okay, so I think it's easy for a guy, sitting in his cabin or hotel room during ski week to be generous with your livelihood. I think your first priority is the economic security of you and your family. And I think you should be focused on that. And I think you want to gain the traction, credibility, the expertise, such that you can, if you decide to, at some point or not, go to a company that's more or less aligned with your values. I don't think this is the sword you want to jump on. If you're doing well at Salesforce, I would say stick it out, continue to do well, and then decide over time as you have the currency to go somewhere else that offers the same upside, psychic returns, and economic security, then you can make that decision. But I wouldn't storm out in a blaze of virtue signaling glory. I think your first obligation is to, again, your and your family's economic security. Now, let's talk a bit about Salesforce. I have a bias here because I've known Marc Benioff for about a decade. And I think that the narrative around Marc is unfair. And one of the things I hate about progressives, and I don't know Marc's politics, but based on what I've seen, I would argue that Marc is a quote-unquote center-left progressive and good to his employees, built an amazing company, and has also been a huge benefactor or donor for San Francisco causes. So I think you have to take I think you have to look at all 35 frames of the movie, if you will, of a 35 millimeter film, or is it a 35 millimeter camera? Shit, I don't know. You get what I'm saying. And one of the things I don't like about progressives is that we are playing into J.D. Vance's and Peter Thiel's hands. What do I mean by that? If I'm asked to comment on the Epstein files and I say that we need criminal indictments against the people here who engaged in sex with underage women, the majority of the comments I will get on social media will be, they're not underage women, they're girls. And that's right. But we seem to, on the left, be more concerned with redistributing virtue as opposed to redistributing income or opportunity or fighting fascism. We're in a trench, literally, as a fascist army is about to run us over. And we're sitting here accusing each other of holding the rifle incorrectly. Because progressives care. If someone says, oh, you're using the wrong language, then, oh, you're an apostate. You're not really one of us. And there's definitely a vein of any rich billionaire white guy in his 50s or 60s is just wrong with whatever he says. I think the Democrats are absolutely guilty of massive identity politics here. I think there's a certain vein or an undercurrent of young men are the problem, billionaires are evil, and all white people are racist. And as long as that vein or the ideology continues to get traction and likes online, then those three cohorts are going to say, fuck you to the Democratic Party, and we're going to have J.D. Vance as president. So a long-winded way of saying, I think Marc Benioff is one of the good guys. And if he fucks up and says something inappropriate, which I do a lot, I don't think that's reason to leave the company. Now, I think you, in a thoughtful, measured way, making it clear to your boss that I am uncomfortable with Salesforce's support or working with the government specifically around issues related to ICE and immigration enforcement, which I think has gone way too far. I think making your thoughts heard in a thoughtful, respectful way to your boss or to whoever you report to, I think that's fine. You have to be careful, though, because being the person who's decided to be the ringleader internally and speak up, everyone will nod and call you a hero, and then someone you don't even know will put your name on a list when they have the next layoff, you're on that list. And that's just the cruel truth of capitalism. Companies don't need to be paying people who are shitposting the CEO or hurting the company. That's the reality of a capitalist society. A place like Salesforce, I think management does listen to its employees, and I think in a respectful, measured way, saying why you're uncomfortable with it. I'd be very careful with social. A lot of people reach out to me and say, I love your social. How can I be more outspoken or provocative? And my advice is don't. Unless you're in the media or it's your job, or unless you already have economic security, be very careful what you post on social media. because it's one thing, I'm not saying censor yourself. I'm saying be measured and recognize that shit is forever. And when you find one bite at a time, I think you have to be in the mix. I think you have to be in New York or San Francisco or London. I think you have to be doing lunches and coffees every goddamn day with family offices. What I have found, I've raised a lot of money. What I have found is you don't raise money on the first, second, or third meeting. You raise it on the fifth or sixth, and they start with a little bit of money. I think of yourself as if you're a good person and you acquit yourself well, even when you lose money, just communicating a lot, slowly but surely you can start to build a book. And then again, a lot of it comes down to a performance, right? But even so, I'm seeing a lot of mid-level, $100 million, $500 million, billion, $3 billion funds just can't raise money right now. So what is it? It's a ton of hard work and getting out a spoon and eating shit and doing a ton of meetings. I think that if there's a hack here, it's content marketing. And that is figuring out a viewpoint or figuring out the most articulate, compelling person in your organization and having them put out content, either newsletters or videos or thought pieces, getting appearances on podcasts where you get to explain the markets and give people the sense that this guy or gal understands or can see the matrix. And then maybe they should do a meeting with them. I'm actually working with right now or advising 150 billion AUM fund, and nobody knows about them. And I'm like, that's great. But if you want to get to 500 billion, you're going to have some awareness and retail presence, which means you're going to need to start putting out thought leadership. No easy route here. Market dynamics trump individual performance. A lot of great managers out there just can't raise money right now. So two, if you have the opportunity to go be a portfolio manager for a bigger fund, I would seriously consider that. Two, if you're committed to raising your own fund, just a shit ton of meetings, day after day, hand-to-hand combat. And then think about what kind of content marketing you can post on. And think of myself as a scientist and a cynic. And is it good to call yourself a cynic? Oh, God, that's awful. I probably am. But, you need optimists, you need pessimists. Optimists get the plane to fly. Pessimists invent seatbelts. You need both. Anyways, but I've always thought religion, to me, just made no fucking sense. I don't have an invisible friend. There's 5,000 gods out there. I believe in one less than most people. And as Ricky Gervais said, if we burned all of the religious books and then burnt all of the science books in 100, 500, 1,000 years would probably look the same. Whereas the religious books, who knows? Now, having said that, as I've gotten older, I've become much less judgmental. And that is, I think some of the beliefs of religion or some of the theories just make no fucking sense to me. But my belief as a quote unquote scientist is that there was nothing and then it exploded into all this. That kind of makes no fucking sense either. So if people want to believe some sort of divine intervention that built all of this and can help them understand or appreciate, how beautiful nature is and how good they feel when they, hug their kids, like I get it. And the fact that religion is used as the connective tissue to get people together on a regular basis to appreciate each other and maybe invest in their community and maybe, wash the feet of others. I think the majority of religion, at least I've come to believe, is probably a net positive. And a lot of people would argue, have good points that no, it's been the catalyst for most death and wars. I get the counter argument here. But I find that the majority of people I know who have some sort of religious upbringing or religious values or beliefs are generally, it's a great guidepost for them, or it's a net positive in their lives. And not only provides them with comfort, but it helps them develop a code around being more graceful and generous with others. I remember my dad's been married and divorced 4 times. I've been to every religious establishment. I remember going to Sunday school with his third wife dropping me off at Sunday school. And the Sunday school teacher would constantly ask, what would Jesus do? So you had to learn about Jesus. And, Jesus probably wouldn't hit Johnny and ask for his lunch money. I think at a very basic level, it has probably been a net positive. It's the extremists in any religion that go batshit crazy and start believing if you're not on my team, you deserve to die or you're less human. That's obviously where things kind of come off the tracks. And I'm a huge believer in a separation of church and state. So what have I done with my kids? Nothing. And I sort of regret it. I did give them a book called A History of Religion, just such that they could be knowledgeable on it. I think it's hard to be a well-read, thoughtful person without at least understanding the basics of religion. But I don't claim to have an answer here. I think this is a very personal question. I think it's a conversation if you're thinking about entering into a long-term relationship with someone that you have alignment around what you plan to do around religion with your children. My atheism is also a real source of strength for me. And that is, I'm 99.9% convinced, I think it's dangerous to be 100% certain of anything, that at some point I will look into my son's eyes and know our relationship is coming to an end. And that I'm never going to see them again, and they're never going to see me again. And that's okay, because it has provided me with a lot of courage and given me the ability to forgive myself. And that is when I say or do something stupid, which I do every fucking day, I try to forgive myself, recognizing that the shame or the embarrassment I feel, it doesn't matter, because the people I'm worried about, what they think of me, are going to be dead soon, and so am I. And so try to be a good person, try to enjoy yourself, try to love others, take risks, tell people you love them, be willing to make mistakes, risk public failure, live life, dance on tables, dance as if no one is watching you, because guess what? You're going to be dead soon, and so are they. I believe that, and I don't believe I'm going to meet up with people and skirt along clouds and judge other people. I just don't buy that personally. And I find that as liberating for me. Knowing that the end is coming makes me feel more bold with my emotions and my actions. And that's been a real unlock for me. I'd like to somehow communicate that to my kids, but I don't want to tell them it's all going to be over soon, you're going to be dead. And I don't know, that doesn't sound like a very inspiring talk before we head to the Arsenal-Liverpool game. But I have failed, I think, as a father, to at least give them enough knowledge around religion such that they're versed or well-versed in something that has played such a huge role in society. And also maybe to give them the chance to make up their own minds. In sum, I have not figured this out, other than to say, I believe that atheism is a form of religious belief. And one of the key tenets of atheism that I've come to embrace is that you respect and accept other people's rights or right to believe in a super being. That's a key component. People think of atheists as people who discriminate against people who have faith. No, a key component of atheism is that you, just as you believe you have the right to be a non-believer, you also respect the rights of people to be believers. That's all for this episode. If you'd like to submit a question, please email a voice recording to officehours@profgmedia.com. That's officehours@profgmedia.com. Or if
I would tell you that.
Well, then why is your children's program so full of this highly sexualized, highly controversial agenda? I don't understand it. It seems strange to me.
Respectfully, sir, it's because it's inaccurate. We have millions of hours of children's programming.
You're saying it's not there. You don't have trans. You don't feature trans characters, trans storylines, trans themes. It's not in your programming.
I'm saying we feature a wide variety of stories and programs to meet a wide variety of people's tastes.
Why is almost half of it? Why does almost half of your children's program feature this highly controversial, highly sexualized material? That just seems strange to me.
Netflix content is synonymous for the modern phenomenon of race swapping both historical and real and fictional characters. Netflix continues to push sexual and gender theory on kids, and maybe this is what was being referred to earlier. 41% of G-rated, kid-approved series contain LGBTQIA+ content.
You have a wide range of programming on HBO. Name one program that is designed to appeal to conservatives.
We don't design our programming to appeal to
I can think of a lot that are designed to go to liberals. Name one. Let me ask you, do you think CNN is fair and balanced?
Sir, I'm not involved with CNN, and in fact, they're not part of this transaction.
Remind you, this was an antitrust hearing. Scott, your reactions.
J.D. Vance goes to Europe and lectures EU leaders on their lack of free speech. And now the Republican Party is claiming that private companies have an agenda and they're not allowed to. So to be fair, CNN is biased. Fox is biased. And private media companies are allowed to have a bias because consumers have a bias. Netflix is probably the most politically neutral of all of them. They were getting shit 2 years ago for airing Dave Chappelle because progressives were freaked out about what they felt were anti-trans comments. So which is it? I know Ted Sarandos. For the life of me, I could not figure out what Ted Sarandos' politics are, and I think he wants to keep it that way. So this notion somehow... And also, I don't even need to know the data, and I know that it's bullshit that 50% of kids' content features an LGBTQ. That is not their agenda. They're just trying to get kids to spend more and more time watching Netflix. They don't have any sort of agenda along those lines. And even if they did, guess what? They're allowed to. The antitrust is a real issue here, and that is, if Netflix also owns HBO, do they consolidate the market at the high-end artisanal subscription content? That's a real issue. If Paramount/CBS is allowed to own CNN and TikTok, is that also an antitrust concern? That's a real issue. But this is what's going on. The Ellisons give money to Republican lawmakers. The Ellisons are trying to come up with a reason for Netflix to not be able to acquire Time Warner. And so they are ginning up a bunch of Republican senators to create some sort of controversy or reason why Netflix should not be able to acquire Time Warner. There are reasons why neither Paramount, CBS / the Ellison should be allowed to acquire it. There are reasons Netflix should not be allowed to acquire it. They are antitrust. It has nothing to do with the bias or the lack thereof of their content. And this is Senators Hawley, and I forget the other guy, who are just fucking coin-operated, who've been told by the Ellisons, we don't want to have to pay more, so go create controversy and some sort of bias among people who have absolutely no ability to think critically about when regulators should weigh in and they shouldn't. Quentin Tarantino films have a fucking bias. They're allowed to sell to whoever they want. This isn't about an editorial bias. This is about a concentration of power that would lead to higher prices, of which there are real concerns. And Senator Booker actually thoughtfully tried to address these concerns, but instead you have coin-operated senators with the Ellisons' head so far up their ass you can barely see their legs dangling out of their asses, trying to pretend they give a flying fuck about free speech and that somehow Netflix is too progressive. And the right answer to, CNN doesn't have a bias, it's more fair and balanced, he should have said, I believe it's more fair and balanced than Fox. And I believe Fox has the right to do whatever the fuck they want, and people can decide if they want to watch or have advertising. This was supposed to be about concentration of power that transfers capital and power from consumers and workers to shareholders. That is a real concern from both bidders. But this is how it's supposed to work. Whoever shows up with the biggest check gets pre-approved for the acquisition, and then there is review across the DOJ, the FTC, and CFIUS around security concerns and antitrust. Instead, we're thinking somehow that they're not allowed to have a bias even when there isn't one. Anyways, thank you for my TED Talk.
It's completely ridiculous. And again, it was a hearing on antitrust. And it just completely devolved into a trial on wokeness. I feel like this is yet another reminder, and I know we say this all the time, of how stupid these Senate hearings are. Like every time these hearings are happening, it's just a giant display of political theater. None of it even matters. And I think it's so funny that these people, these Republican senators default to the wokeness argument, probably because they don't really know where to land on the antitrust argument. Because the trouble is that you've got all these different players in here and they don't really know who to side with. Because on the one hand, like, oh, maybe Netflix is woke, so maybe they should be against them. But on the other hand, Paramount's controlled by the Ellisons, and the Ellisons are big tech. But historically they've been against big tech. But also, oh wait, the Ellisons have been donated to Donald Trump. So who are we supposed to side with? So it's almost like wokeness is just the default backup calling card that you immediately knee-jerk reaction go to when you don't really know what the fuck you're talking about. And that seems to be what has happened in this Senate hearing, which was supposed to be, again, what do you do when an extremely large entertainment company is purchasing another extremely large entertainment company? And most of these entertainment channels are now going to be housed under one company that has like very legitimate and serious monopoly concerns. There are also decent arguments on the other side about the role of YouTube and Instagram and on TikTok and all these digital platforms. But it's almost like that stuff is boring to them. They don't really understand that. That's business stuff. We don't really care. I'd rather talk about LGBTQ and transgender actors in children's shows, because that's something that I know my supporters are really going to get riled up about. Is it going to have any impact on the transaction? Is it going to change the trajectory of monopolization in America? Fuck no. But it doesn't matter, because again, it's all for the clips. It's all for the drama. It's all for the show. And this was just another reminder of that.
You know how people say the politicians are speaking to a crowd of one? Like whenever Secretary Noem speaks, she's just thinking, does he want me to say this? Does he want me to say that? They're all playing. They're all playing.
I haven't heard that. That's good.
They're all playing to President Trump. Senators Hawley, and I forget the other one, they all had an audience of one, but it wasn't President Trump. It was Larry Ellison. And unfortunately, the only people who demonstrate any actual domain expertise or any fidelity to what the actual hearing was about was, first and foremost, Senator Klobuchar. I mean, here's the thing. If we're going to talk about affordability, throwing $40 billion at soybean farmers while pissing off China and then taking that money and giving it to Argentina, who's now... None of this shit works. Tariffs are inflationary. Nobody wants to have an adult conversation. If you want to bring inflation down, the two things we need to do, and there's a variety of things, but the two biggest things, free trade, get rid of all these ridiculous tariffs, reduce tariffs. There'll be some losers, some businesses in manufacturing and services will go out of business in the U.S., but eventually, when you protect your domestic markets, at some point, your competitors abroad own fucking everything, and then eventually they come for your lunch. And two, massive antitrust. I'm finally have enough money and enough influence right now. I know I'll have, if there's a Democratic president, I'll know I'll have his ear. And amongst a variety of things, whether it's mandatory national service, $25 an hour minimum wage, single-payer health care, whatever it is, I'm going to push so hard and say the way you oxygenate the economy, the way you bring down prices over 2, 5, 10 years is massive antitrust.
Yeah.
As voters, we're lazy. We're looking for a quick fix. Oh, gas prices are down. That has nothing to fucking do with us. That's about shale in Canada. That's about geopolitics. That's about Saudi Aramco deciding to open or close or tighten the spigot. That has nothing to do with anything. If you want prices to come down, you need massive free and open trade, and you need specifically to break up all of these monopolies who are charging monopoly rents. But nobody wants to have an adult conversation around the hard structural work of actually bringing down prices.
Yeah.
But the fact, and I hate the fact that we're talking about these village idiots who are coin-operated at the hands of the Ellisons, as opposed to Senators Klobuchar and Booker, who actually want to talk about the issue at hand.
No, I 100% agree. It does feel that every time an antitrust lawsuit comes up, or there is an implication that there could be potentially a monopoly on the table, we always come up with an excuse as to why it isn't actually a monopoly. In this case, it's the YouTube and Instagram and TikTok argument. The argument is if YouTube exists and if TikTok exists and if Instagram exists, then, they're competing against these platforms, which, I get. I understand that argument and it makes a lot of sense. However, are we ever going to have a moment where we decide, actually, no, this isn't okay? I mean, the same thing happened with Google and the Google antitrust case. And then they decided, oh, yeah, you were operating a monopoly, but AI came along and AI really destroyed the business. And so now we found another excuse to not have any antitrust enforcement. It just seems that every time we come up with some reason, whether it's wokeness related or otherwise, as to why we shouldn't be implementing any form of regulation. And so, yeah, it's not a surprise that the market looks the way it does, because we've just decided that we don't really want to do anything about it. Let's also talk about Disney's new CEO, Josh D'Amaro. He's the head of Parks. He's going to be taking over on March 18th when Bob Iger will be stepping down. He's been working at Disney for 28 years. He has been, crucial to expanding the Disney Experiences business, which is basically their parks and cruises, which is now the core piece of the business. And this is a whole other conversation, but it is fascinating how that has changed, where the highly capital intensive piece of the business, which is operating a theme park, used to be way undervalued by investors, but now the narrative has flipped. They're less interested in certainly the linear, also kind of the streaming. They're very excited about the experiences. He's been running that business. So now he's going to be taking over as CEO. Do you have any reactions to this new pick and the end, potentially, of the reign of Bob Iger?
Bob Iger is the guy that, after coming back from Vietnam, a war hero, decided to go back and had his legs blown off. That was one of the worst personal decisions in corporate history, for him to start heckling from the cheap seats around his successor and then convince his board that he should go back and shed shareholder value. I mean, it's just been, and a lot of it isn't his fault. He's basically, the market has poured honey on him and sent him hunting for bears. I like that. That's like something that Brian Williams would say. That's like having a moose in a convertible. Anyways, why does that make me happy, Ed? Look, this company will have an overhang. This is also a buy. This company is going to have an overhang until they're able to get rid of their linear stuff. And that is, Disney, Nat Geo, ABC. Because in a conglomerate structure, and I experienced this at the New York Times where I was on the board, Ed, for 2 years. I don't know if you knew that, but
wow.
Yeah, I know. It's very impressive. So, but here's the bottom line. We had some great assets. We owned 17% of the Red Sox. We owned the 7th tallest building in the world. We owned a really outstanding media company called the New York Times. And then we had all these shitty regional papers that were a melting ice cube. And what happens in a conglomerate business model, we also owned About.com. Anyway, what happens in a conglomerate model with stuff that makes no sense, the market hates it, and the market finds the shittiest business and assigns that multiple to the entire business. And essentially every analyst report and Q&A and earnings call or the investor relations or Bob Iger on a call, it goes something like this. Parks, unbelievable business with an incredible moat around it. Film studio, doing well, creating IP that is drafted into our parks, singular experience. No one can compete with our parks. If you don't take your kids to a $1,400 a night shitty hotel with shitty food and take them to Disneyland 4 or 5 times by the time they're 10, someone's going to call child services on you. Disney streaming is getting some leverage. It has singular positioning around family. You know, people say they've missed stuff and they've missed trends. I don't buy that. I think Disney still does a great job with their IP. Very talented people, outstanding culture. All of it's great, and then they have to go, but our linear platforms showed 8% decline in revenues and 14% decline in EPS. As soon as they shed that shit and go good bank, bad bank, or sell it to a consolidator, and it's all about the parks, and it's all about the experiences, cruises, and the streaming and the studio, this company goes up substantially in value. Disney is at a 10-year low. And Bob has clearly had the for sale sign out on those networks, but I don't think no one has offered him probably the price he wants. He probably has an unrealistic view of the value of ABC and ESPN. By the way, ESPN used to be the cash cow for Disney, just to tell you how much things have changed. The other thing is, I wonder if the last 6 months are going to be awful, because the fact that he's actually leaving ahead of schedule says to me that he looked at the back half of the year and went, oh, fuck, right. I don't want to be around for this. So, and by the way, I loved your interview with Rich Greenfield. I always learn when I listen from Rich. And you had him on markets, right? When did you have Rich on?
We had Rich on last week. That's right.
You do this some days when I'm not on? Anyways, that's what you call scale. By the way, do you see all the stuff behind me?
I do. I love it.
How awesome is that?
It's great.
Oh, and who noticed it first, by the way, and why?
Who noticed it first? I don't know.
Let me put it this way. Who's not up here?
Who's not up there?
Kara Swisher. She gave me so much shit. I'm like, let's be honest, Kara.
Let's go.
You're my ex-wife. These are all my Belarusian hookers. I am so down. These people are making me money, giving me more joy, and you're just the first wife.
Oh, man. Belarusian hooker.
I can't afford the Russian hoes. I go for the Belarusians. Anyways, that's probably a hate crime. This is...
Don't worry about it.
Disney is, I think, an undervalued asset. The Parks guy is the right pick. These things are... I believe the back half of the year might be rough for them because of our head-up-your-ass tariff economic warfare against our strongest ally, Canada. Anyways, the park's amazing, the film studio amazing, the streaming media company is starting to get real momentum. They have to get rid. And by the way, the new co, whether it's the independent, whether it's just bad bank and they spin them out on their own or someone consolidates them, that will also be a good stock to own because it's a different complexion of capital. As long as you reduce costs faster than revenue declines, you can churn out and consolidate all the other cable guys. I think that's going to be a good stock. But until they do this good bank, bad bank, it's always going to be assigned a multiple of a shitty cable ad-supported company that is not growing. And the reality is Disney is growing. I believe if the new CEO sold all of the linear, right? Nat Geo, ESPN, ABC, I think if they sold it for $1, the stock would go up.
I think I agree.
Because everything they're doing is an apology. Everything is, but. But. The overhang of these linear networks, the confusion of the business strategy, the constant apologizing for the last 20 minutes of the earnings call is just an enormous overhang on the stock.
100% agree. I think the question now being, when is it going to happen? And potentially it's going to happen now that they have a CEO. Because, remember, you've been calling this for a long time. You've been saying this is an issue, not just in the last few months or the last year, but I think you've been saying this for years now. They have to get rid of the linear assets. I would imagine that everyone's going to be hammering on Josh D'Amaro's door, demanding the same thing. So I wonder if now that we've got a new CEO in the building, is it actually going to be possible? Perhaps you have a prediction on if this is actually going to happen or not, but I will ask you the question. Do you think it's going to happen in the next, say, 12 months?
The good bank, bad bank, the sale of the linear assets?
Yeah.
Oh, they've been for sale for 2 years. It's just a question of who can show up with an offer. And I imagine there's probably some content or, I don't know, who knows, creative contracts that are sort of trying to, unmess or unfry or unscramble an egg. But it's not a matter of if, it's just when. And I think they were probably hoping to get a better price for ESPN, and they just never got the number they wanted. But absolutely, this guy has, typically what happens with a new CEO, you can do almost anything, and your board just rubber stamps it. You have a honeymoon period. So whenever you have a new CEO, you want to say to him, boss, okay, go hard, go early, because you have license to do whatever the fuck you want.